This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Well, greetings, everyone. This is Joyce Davis, PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor, and this is Battleground PA. We are here on the battleground, and as I have told you, we're going to start bringing in some different warriors, people you aren't used to seeing on the battleground. And for that, well, we still have our friend Jeffrey Lord, who's here with us. Jeffrey, you want to say hello to our guests?
Hello to our guests. How are you? Good to see you, Brian.
Everybody knows Jeffrey Lord. He is our Republican analyst and definitely a Trump supporter. And now today we have Brian Phillips. And Brian Phillips is with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. His bio says for over a decade, he has helped policymakers and political candidates develop effective messages and communication strategies. And if you read his bio, you will see that it's quite impressive in his engagement in politics. He has worked with Senator Ted Cruz. He has communications director for U.S. Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He has done a lot of things that I think really attest to his engagement in politics and in government in the United States. So with that, I mean, go back and read his bio. You'll be impressed. With that, first of all, we want to thank you, Brian, for taking time to come here and share with us. But the topic is this Project 2025. And, you know, people don't know. They're hearing this, they're hearing that. So we decided to go to the source, somebody who really knows and can simply lay out for us what you see as the most important things voters should know, especially Pennsylvania voters. We're a battleground, and we want to make sure we make the right decision. So let's start with your telling us what we need to know. What is Project 2025?
Sure. Project 2025 is the effort to restore the constitutional role of the federal government, specifically the executive branch. It's basically two parts. It's the book, which is called The Mandate for Leadership, which anybody can download it and read it for themselves. It's at project2025.org. And the book essentially is a policy reform book, and it goes department by department, takes every single department within the executive branch and all of the major agencies and goes through each one and dissects them and demonstrates where in those agencies they are not faithfully executing the law, right? They're violating the Constitution, or they are not faithfully executing the law, or they are running essentially their own agendas that are sometimes in contradiction to the current administration. And so, it's not summer reading. I wouldn't take it to the beach with you, but if you are interested in specific issues like eliminating the Department of Education or the 88,000 stormtroopers at the IRS or some of these issues, we go through each one of these agencies and talk about ways to reform them so that we can restore the proper role of the federal government. And then quickly, the second one is, of course, Ronald Reagan famously said that personnel is policy, and it is critically important that we have people in the federal government that understand their role, their constitutional role, working for the federal government, particularly the executive branch, that they understand that they're supposed to faithfully execute the laws and that they're not supposed to be running their own agendas or usurping the limits of their own power. And so it's an effort to reach out to all Americans who would like to come into the government, who would like to be vetted, to be in the administration, the next conservative administration, to restore that proper role.
Yeah, I think, Jeffrey, one of the initial questions we have, and maybe you can speak to this, is there's been some confusion about whether former President Trump actually supports this or not. That is what, when we look at it, we say, well, no, he may not support it. Some things he says are not good about it. So do you know, Jeffrey, can you shed any light on that?
I really can't. I was somewhat surprised that he put out the statement, but on the other hand, I understand as somebody whose chances of being the next president and having already been president are fairly high. I can understand why he would want to keep an open door as to what he will or will not do in the next administration. There is a serious problem, and at one point I suggested to him myself that, when we talk about term limits, it's always spoken of in terms of members of Congress. And I said, I think what we need to do is put term limits on bureaucrats. There is nothing that says that if you get to be appointed the assistant to the assistant to the assistant secretary, that you get to spend the next 25 or 30 years in the bureaucracy. And in my case, I had a stint in the bureaucracy in the Bush 41 administration, working at HUD for Jack Kemp, who was the secretary. And I really did get to see close up. I mean, I was a political appointee, and as is proper, when these people named Bill and Hillary something came along in the fall of 1992 after the election, I got a note that said, in essence, "Dear
You're
Jeffrey,
out of here, right?
dear Jeffrey, thank you so much for your government service. Be out by noon, January 20th." That's the way it should work.
Yep.
The one problem I have, though, Joyce, is this, and Joyce has probably heard me say this before, but I'll repeat it for you, Brian, that if a congressman wakes up in the morning and his kid has a runny nose, he goes into his office and asks his legislative assistant to draw up legislation creating the Department of Children with Runny Noses. The legislation passes. They then build a 10-story building in Washington, fill it with unionized employees who all contribute to the Democratic Party, and then the department will never vanish. As President Reagan used to say, the only thing that has a government department is the only thing that has eternal life. And I think that's pretty true, but it's disturbingly true. And
Jeffrey,
I think with it as a question.
You raised a good point. I think underlying all of this is the issue that the feeling that perhaps some of these agencies have become too powerful and too independent. That's what it sounds like to me. But there's one point I think that's worth mentioning here. I spent a lot of time in Washington and love going to forums at think tanks. Think tanks operate on their own. They come up with their own agendas, their own ideas that they can give. It doesn't necessarily mean that this agenda will be accepted, right? Or everything in it. Brian, is that correct? I mean, you guys came together and thought you would tackle this issue. And
that's right. The Heritage Foundation has been putting out the mandate for leadership for 40 years. I mean, it started with the Reagan administration. We at the Texas Public Policy Foundation put out a Liberty Action Agenda every 2 years for our legislature. This is what think tanks do. And we said at the outset of this, when we created Project 2025, it was over 2 years ago. And we said at the outset, this is not for any one campaign. This is not for any one candidate. In fact, when we launched it last year, in April of last year, we got accused by the media of being in the tank for Ron DeSantis at the time. So now suddenly it's switched and it's a Trump project. So they just use it however they want to use it. But that's because we wanted this to be for the next conservative administration. And the fact is, these issues are not the sexiest issues of the day. Government reform and getting rid of bureaucracies are not border security or healthcare or taxes. Those are the issues that you see a lot of politicians run on. So we as a conservative movement got together, and over 100 groups are part of this, and we said we're the only ones that are going to be able to try and bring awareness and urgency to this issue, because as Jeffrey points out, you've got people there who are there for 10, 20, 30 years through multiple administrations, and they have, there's no culture of accountability. And so that's really what Project 2025 is more than anything. It is an accountability project that is saying, look, the bureaucracy, we have got to root out people who are not following the law, who are not obeying their limits on authority, and who are oftentimes running their own agenda. And we need to replace those people with people who believe in our principles, our founding constitutional principles of limited government and faithfully executing those laws.
And there is one other thing, Joyce, that I would add to go back to President Reagan talking about personnel as policy. If you put somebody and pick a department at random, I'll pick the Department of Education. If you put somebody in there who thinks, yeah, this department needs to be responsive to, I'll use Trump as an example, but it could be any President Trump, and therefore we're going to do A, B, and C instead of E, F, and G, all hell will break loose. And the bureaucrats will target that political appointee for dismissal because that appointee is in fact doing what the president of the moment wants him or her to do. So that is a real problem, that just because they get the appointed job doesn't mean that they get to do it uninterrupted. You've got all sorts of people who are going to throw all kinds of roadblocks in their ability to do their job.
Well, one of the questions that I know comes up from the other side, and we need to talk about it, is that there needs to also be this accountability for whoever's in power in the administration. And it's been seen that perhaps the way things are now is a check on abuse of power, a check on but talk about that. I mean, our government is definitely founded on checks and balances. Not one branch of government is supposed to be too powerful, because let's face it, all of us have the potential to abuse our authority. How do you get past that, Brian?
There is no constitutional obligation for members within the executive branch to be a check on the actual president himself. I mean, he runs the department, and everyone there throughout the entire executive branch serves at the pleasure of the president. Now, of course, the constitutional checks are from the other two branches of government that we all famously learned, or maybe they don't learn that anymore, but we all did. We learned that famously in 3rd and 4th grade about how Congress checks, writes the laws and checks the power of the executive branch, and the same thing with judicial review with the Supreme Court. But there's no inherent right within, amongst the bureaucracy to then act as a check on the president. The check on the president are the people who nominated him and then elected him president. And if they don't like his policies and the way he's executing, then when he runs for re-election, he can be removed by the people from office. But that assertion that there's some sort of internal check within the executive branch is absurd.
Okay, and the other question that let's talk a little bit about the issues and the actual departments that you're looking at. I think the education department is one, Homeland Security is one. Would you talk about those that you really think, need to be addressed right now?
Absolutely. I mean, the Department of Education, it's funny because the left wants to use that one as some extreme proposal that we have to eliminate the Department of Education. That's been, ask Jeffrey, that's been boilerplate Republican conservative policy for almost since the inception of the Department of Education.
Jimmy Carter created, Ronald Reagan wanted it to disappear, and it didn't.
Yeah, it was a sop to the unions, right? I mean, that was the whole thing. So we've been opposed to the Department of Education for good, legitimate reasons that we talk about in the book. Number one is that the vast majority of the money is spent and the vast majority of the decisions are made at the state and local level with regard to how we're going to implement curriculum and how we're going to spend our money. So there's no real point. There's no real overarching point, much less any kind of constitutional responsibility to manage education at the federal level. And so what you have is that building that Jeffrey described, where you just have a bunch of bureaucrats and busybodies trying to justify their jobs. Now, there are certain things that you could conceivably think of as like a federal role in certain education elements, right? Like Pell Grants are a good thing, and certain programs like that. But there doesn't need to be an entire department. Those kinds of things, you can eliminate the Department of Education and roll some of those things into other departments, or just put them under the White House under its own agency.
Okay. And what about getting rid of the FBI? What's going on there? That scares everybody.
More specifically, the Department of Homeland Security certainly did not accomplish what it set out to do. In fact, if you talk to a lot of experts, who are long in the tooth, they'll tell you that the information sharing today is actually worse than it was before 9/11, and so it has totally failed as a department. And so the Department of Homeland Security certainly can be broken up into its various components to improve information sharing and keep the country safe. And as far as the FBI goes, what we're really aimed at is eliminating the weaponization of the Justice Department, specifically the FBI. I mean, it's not the FBI, but just look at the culture of what's going on in the Secret Service right now. I mean, all of that is making headlines. And what do we have? Do we have accountability? I mean, the former president was almost murdered in front of the entire country. Is there any sense that there's a sense or a feeling of accountability at that organization? No. The head of the organization comes out and literally fights both the head and then the acting director came out and fought with members of Congress publicly.
but now they're gone. So
Right, and
there
they're
was
gone.
some
Well, she's gone
accountability.
for sure. But the acting director came out and fought with members of Congress as they are trying to do their constitutional obligation of holding these departments accountable and overseeing the accomplishments. Think about the culture at that organization that you feel brazen enough to go out there and fight with essentially your boss on these kinds of things. And so, so we see that certainly at the FBI as well, that there's just a culture of defiance. There's not a culture of accountability. And so we have, very descriptive policies and reforms that people can read and ways to get back to just the federal government in general serving the people and following their constitutional role.
No, Brian, you're not really, though, saying getting rid of the FBI. You still need an investigative unit or something like that.
Of course, we're not eliminating the FBI. I believe there's only a few instances where we actually eliminate departments. Probably Jeffrey has issues with that. I'm sure that we took it on the chin from some conservatives saying, you should eliminate more government. And so it's not really the extreme document that some people think it is, because there's certainly organizations and agencies which should be eliminated that we don't even go that far and call for. FBI is not one of them. Certainly there needs to be a federal investigative force, a domestic federal investigative force.
The problem is, I see it, Joyce, it doesn't matter whether it's the FBI or the Education Department or Housing and Urban Development, or pick one. When you fill it with a bunch of people and give them, in essence, lifetime protection, they eventually do come to think they're the boss. And that the American people work for them instead of the other way around. And so you get this arrogance, and it flows from one department to another to another. You can find it just about everywhere you look. And the fact that they've got this power in whatever bureaucracy they happen to be, it is particularly concerning in the FBI, in the Department of Justice. And I will predict to you now that if, in fact, Donald Trump wins, he will zero in on the Department of Justice to try and unpoliticize the politicization and weaponization of the department. And there will be all hell to pay with members of Congress and all this kind of thing are going to accuse him of all sorts of terrible things. But somebody is going to have to do this. And that, I think, assuming there is a Trump presidency, that will be a big fight.
But I guess what I'm hearing, just correct me, I'm hearing a lot of change and chaos, because these people are not going to go quietly into that dark. I mean, right? So I'm just thinking, if he does get elected, and if indeed you go to change all of this stuff, we're in for some turbulent times, right?
Yes.
I would agree with that, just because it hasn't been done before. But that's why the conservative movement got together and is raising this issue, because it needs to be done. The reality is, the courts haven't tested these kinds of things, but once they do, it's pretty clear cut that the president can hire and fire whoever he wants. There might be some civil service protections which they will point to say that they have a right to either appeal or attest or something of that nature. But at the end of the day, everybody has a boss and somebody can fire you. And so if that's coming from the president of the United States and it's going down through the departments and the heads of those departments are then making changes, it's pretty clear cut that we can, that those people can be removed because they serve at the pleasure of the department head or the secretary or the president. But it will be significant change. And they're not going to go quietly, because they built the bureaucracy over the last 40 years, and they're not just going to turn around and let it go. That's one of the things that we're telling people, is that even if Trump gets elected and Trump, on day one starts cleaning house, this is something that will have to endure through his administration and into the next conservative administration, because it's not going to be as easy as just simply firing people and then start looking for resumes. There's going to be a fight because they, like I said, they didn't build this thing overnight, and they're not just going to let it go.
When you drive around Washington, and I go down there periodically for this, that, or the other event, it truly is amazing. Just since I left there, I left in December of 2004 after being there since 1978. And you drive around, it's called the swamp for a reason. You got all of these buildings, and it works as I described, with getting people employed and then sort of permanently burrowed in. But then there's this whole culture that spreads out from it. Restaurants, bars, on and on and on they go. You walk around near any one of these bureaucracies, and you will find all these restaurants and bars. One of my first introductions to this, when I lived there, I lived on Capitol Hill in a quaint little one-block street called Duddington Place, which was down First Street from the Republican National Committee. And a brand new restaurant called Bullfeathers appeared and opened up, Bullfeathers being a favorite saying of Teddy Roosevelt. So their symbol for the restaurant was a pair of his monocle glasses. And this quickly became the place to go because it was on the House side of the Capitol. There was never a moment that Bullfeathers is not occupied. And that's just typical of how it works.
I lived in D.C. for about 20 some years. And I started in D.C. near Lincoln Park and then moved out to the suburbs, right, and had to commute in. But I like the energy. I like the fact that there are all these think tanks with forums going on all the time. I like the fact that people are about something in that. I mean, to me, there's an energy there. I mean, maybe we look at it a little bit differently. And I just that galvanizes me to be around people who are about something like you guys. I mean, if you're there, you're about getting stuff done, right? But let me just say this: give me, and if I'm with somebody like a mother, right, which I am, but let's say I have small children in school, and let's say I don't have a good job or whatever, I need health care. How is all of this and things are expensive and all that? Brian, how are you going to help me help the Pennsylvania mommy deal with all this? How are what you're doing going to be better for me?
Unfortunately, this is one of those issues that affects nearly every decision that everyone makes. It just kind of does it under the radar. So when you get up in the morning and you get your kids ready for school and you go out onto the road and you try to work at your business or you take them to school and you're expecting certain things to happen at the school, within your business or your customers or the taxes that come out of your paycheck, all of that is done. All of the rules and the laws and the regulation, all the rules and regulations that we have to live under are all essentially done within the executive branch at those regulatory agencies. And so you may not even know that some of the things that you're being forced to do or coerced to do or compelled to do are the brainchild of some bureaucrat somewhere in some agency and never made it through Congress. And certainly were never voted on, and certainly there was no accountability for that decision being made. And so these are the kinds of things that we're trying to expose that do affect everyone's life, literally from the moment they wake up and try to put gas in their car and how expensive that is, or they take their kids to school and they're not learning because they're getting this woke education, or they're trying to get health care but they can't get the drugs.
Okay. Woke is fine with me, but go ahead. I see.
Okay, well, then I won't use that term. We're just not a quality education in terms of academics, but they're learning social justice or whatever it is, or in healthcare. I mean, the fact that you can't get certain prescriptions, or that you won't, or that your insurance, especially if you're on Medicare or Medicaid, that insurance won't cover certain things that your doctor says that you need. We all deal with these decisions literally every day. We just don't know that it came from some third, fourth level bureaucrat in the federal government. And so that's what we're trying to expose and root out those people that are making those decisions in a way that is not faithfully executing the law, that is running their own agendas and not understanding the limits of their own power.
Brian, just an observation. I'm glad to learn that somebody I've met finally has 6 lives to do this in.
Well, that's why there's 110 conservative organizations that have banded together to do this across the 50 states.
That's what I was going to ask you. This is a widespread thing that's involved a lot of different organizations. How long have you been working on this project?
So it's been over 2 years now. So it would have been in 2022 when we first started putting the working groups together. My organization, TPPF, was one of the founding organizations that worked on 6 or 7 different chapters. And then I was part of the communications team that launched it last year in April. So we've been working, TPPF and I have been working on this issue, on this project for over 2 years now. But honestly, this project is really the culmination of one of the major principles of the conservative movement, which of course is limited government and getting back to a federal government that is much more manageable and respects the Constitution.
And I would assume that whether former President Trump is victorious in November or not, this project is remaining. It's going to be a roadmap for the next time a conservative has the ability to carry it out. Is that correct?
Yeah, the rumors of our demise are greatly exaggerated, as a famous man once said. Yes, we will continue to do this regardless if President Trump is elected or not. We will continue to do this even after Trump is out of office. And in fact, we are looking at ways to expand this into state legislatures and state administrations as well. We've had governors reach out to us and say, hey, some of those people that are in your database, if they don't go work for Trump, can they come work for us? So we're looking at ways to even expand this throughout the country.
Okay. Well, dear readers and dear viewers, there's so much. This is a complex issue here, as politics is complex, Jeffrey. So we haven't been able to kind of tell you all of the different things, but suffice it to say that the underlying idea here, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we need reform. They believe we need reform in the federal bureaucracies, and the way that, and it can't just be tinkered with, it has to be completely redone, right? And am I right that it's going to consolidate more power under the president in some of these areas? And you think that's just fine because there's still the checks and balances of Congress and the people, the voters. Is that correct, Brian?
I agree with about 98% of that. I wouldn't characterize it as consolidating more power. I would characterize it as restoring the proper role of the executive branch and the power that the president has from the Constitution.
Got it.
And Joyce, just one thing I would add. Governments are going to come and go. The problem is also the benefit. The benefit is that governments are made up of human beings.
Yep.
The problem is that governments are made up of human beings.
Yep. And when we get to that, that's why I do think there should be checks on things, checks on people, especially individuals. But I get where you're coming from. You're basically now saying there's no checks also sometimes on these federal bureaucracy. So I get what your argument is. So basically, I'm going to let Brian leave us with whatever the final thing is that he wants our viewers and our voters to know about Project 2025 and about the elections coming up.
You bet. At its core, Project 2025 is an accountability project. Accountability for those that have turned the federal government into a weapon against the American people. So we would ask that those of you, whether you're on the right, left, center, if you're anti-political or wherever you are on the spectrum, these issues absolutely affect you right now, whatever you're doing, working at your business, taking your kids to school, trying to get health care. So join us, go to project2025.org, download the Mandate for Leadership, read the chapters that interest you, and join us if you'd like to start this revolutionary reform.
Thank you,
Joyce,
Brian. Yeah,
Joyce, I would just end with the wisdom of that great Beatle, John Lennon. All we are saying is give peace a chance.
Yeah, peace. Okay, that's our day, Jeffrey. Okay, you're dating us now. Well, good. Thank you again, Brian. We really, really, really appreciate your taking the time. We know you're busy. And readers, do your homework. He's told you where to read it. Go and read it and see if you agree with it or not. So with that, thank you so much. And Brian, we may have you back again. Enjoy Texas, okay?
I'd love to be back. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye,
Okay.
everyone.